we go. You should hear something that says recording in progress. So there's a lot of material to cover in this class. And so part of what I'm going to do at the beginning of this class is, kind of explain, give an overview of what we're going to be covering both in the entire course and also in this particular class. We'll be meeting once a month. This class will happen once a month on the first Saturday of the month for the next year. And over the course of that year, we will be looking at the Chinese characters, also called Hanja, H-A-N-J-A. You spell it out in English. The Hanja that make up the Heart Sutra. And in going through that, we will divide those Hanja up, and we'll cover 30 of them a month, which is not that much. Now, if you do the math, 30 times 12 is 360. There are actually, so if you when you write out the Heart Sutra, and we'll be looking at the Heart Sutra in just a minute. When you write out the Heart Sutra, there's actually 270 Chinese characters that you write out. There is a version that's also used in Japan where they add 2 extra characters, so that'd be 272. But a lot of those characters are repeated. So if you count up just the unique characters, it's a 119, which is also the same in the Japanese version. So it's 119 characters to learn. Only 119 characters. And we're going to have a whole year to do it. However, many of the characters are very complicated. And in order to make the complicated characters more accessible, easier to learn, we're going to break them down into components. And so if you take all the characters and all the components in the Heart Sutra, you get 305 altogether. And then what we'll also do in the course of the class is we're going to add in some characters that aren't included in the Heart Sutra. Like the character for compassion isn't in the Heart Sutra. The character for Zen isn't in the Heart Sutra. These are things that are interesting and important for Buddhists to know. And in almost all cases, we will be adding characters that aren't in the Heart Sutra, but we'll be doing it by rearranging the components that are already covered by breaking down the characters that are in the Heart Sutra. So it'll add up to 360. Yeah. So I don't know if anybody has any questions about how we're going to do this, or can we do that? And I assure you that you can do it. So like we will learn in the course of a year, we will learn fewer characters than the average Chinese second grader knows how to write. Okay. So it's not easy. Okay. So on the one hand, it requires effort. On the other hand, it is doable with some effort. Any initial questions, or Okay. All right. So, yeah, go ahead, Fatima. Fatima, am I saying your name right, Fatima?
Yep, that's right. Evening, everyone. It's 8 o'clock here in England, so
great, England.
Night class for me. Just wondering before I start, in terms of the writing, I'm using a standard pen and pencil. Is that all I need?
Yes. So, and I'm going to talk about that as well. This is not a class in calligraphy. So calligraphy, literally, the English word calligraphy means beautiful writing. And so our beautiful writing is a wonderful thing to aspire to, okay? But we want to learn how to write legibly. And so any person who knows Chinese characters, whether they're Chinese or Japanese or Korean or Vietnamese or American or English or whatever, can write these characters with a pencil and a paper. You don't need special paper. You don't need a special pen or ink. You can do all those things. You can get expensive ink. And so my teacher it does very beautiful calligraphy, and he gets you grind the ink and you mix it up and everything, and you get very nice paper and get a brush, and which is wonderful. It's also very time consuming, and it's if you want to learn how to write the Heart Sutra, it's not necessary. Um, on the other hand, if you want to learn how to do calligraphy, you got to know what the characters look like and how to draw them. Okay, and then you can add to that the ability to make them look, beautiful. Um, so yeah, that's a good question. But yeah, you can write with anything in any posture. You don't have to put on. You see if you look at YouTube videos of calligraphy, it can get very elaborate. Light some incense, put on a kimono, whatever. But we're not going to do that. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I don't want to criticize, someone who goes to the trouble to do that. But yeah, it's not necessary. All right, that's a long-winded answer to your question, Fatima. Thank you for asking. Okay, so let me see if I can open up the correct PowerPoint presentation to start going through these. Oh yeah, here it is. And so I've got to share my screen. And all of our pictures will become much smaller. And oh yeah, now I've got to go into All right. So now, in the course of what we're doing, let's see. I'm probably going to have to. Yeah. So I don't know what how it appears on your screen, but only one picture, probably only one person's picture will appear at a time while it's in presentation mode. We won't be able to see each other. Um, uh, uh, that shouldn't be too much of a problem, though. But if anybody wants to ask a question, you can raise your hand. And if you raise your hand and I don't hear you, you can unmute yourself and give a shout out. And also, it would probably be best if you are muted, just so there isn't like background noise and stuff. Um, hear each other's dogs and cats and neighbors and things like that. Okay, so this is the first slide, and okay, one important thing on the first slide is the schedule over here. So it's 8 o'clock in England. It's 3 o'clock here on the East Coast of the United States. I think Joe is in Kentucky, where it's also 3 o'clock.
No, sir, I'm in Ohio.
Oh, sorry, Ohio, Kentucky, whatever. I used to live in Indiana. It's all the same. The Midwest, somewhere out there in the Midwestern part of the United States, the heartland. Sorry for misidentifying your location.
That's all right.
Okay, all right. So the first session will go until 35 after the hour. Then we'll have a 5-minute break. Then the next session will go until 15 after the next hour. Then we'll have a 10-minute break. And then the final session will go until 2 hours after we start. And in each class, well, although I've already, I've been talking for a little while, and I wanted to make sure, we were kind of all on the same page and knowing where we are and what we're doing. But I want to start each class with actually reciting the Heart Sutra. So we can't really recite it together very well on Zoom, but we can watch a video of it with the, well, let me show you what I'm talking about. Let's see if I have that video. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just a second while I hunt around on my laptop, make sure. I was panicking earlier today because I couldn't find the chanting video, the right one. but I think I have it now. Yeah, I think this might be it. Nope, that's not it. Yeah, that's it. Okay, so now I'm going to share the screen again, and I'm going to describe what you're seeing, just so you know what it is. And what this video is, and I'll make this. I'll have to upload this version of the video to YouTube as well. This is a version of the video. Who here already knows how to recite the Heart Sutra? Not necessarily perfectly by memory, but just can do it or has done it before. Okay, all right. So this video will help you to do that. So when we learn how to write the Heart Sutra, and I'll show you how helpful this is later on in the slide. I have a slide that really illustrates this well. But if you're learning how to write the Heart Sutra, it's very good to be able to recite it, so that you know it, because each character is a syllable. And so if you know how to recite it, you can go through the characters one by one. And if you know how and reciting it is actually easier than writing it. Reciting it also takes a little bit of effort. And you don't have to have it memorized perfectly by any means. Anyway, let me just share my screen again and start to show you this video. All right, can everyone see my screen now? Okay, so this here, this says the Heart Sutra with Hanja, Hangul, and Romaja. Okay, so in Hanja, this is actually the Heart Sutra. Heart Sutra in Hanja, this is the Chinese characters that we'll be learning. This is the way it's written out in Korean, which is the pronunciation that we'll be using in this class because that's how I've learned to recite it. It's very close to the pronunciation in Chinese or Japanese or Vietnamese, and but it's impossible to cover all the different pronunciations in a single class without making the class much more complicated. And so now I'm gonna put it in full screen mode and I'm going to mute myself. I'm sorry. Now that the actual words of the Heart Sutra are being displayed, I just wanted to once again make sure you know what you're looking at here on the screen. The part that's being recited and that you should try to learn as part of this class is the third line in each of these groups of three. The first line is the characters that we're going to be learning how to write. The third line is the spelled out version of how it's pronounced. The line in the middle is the Korean way of writing it, which actually is quite helpful to have on hand. It's not something that you have to learn in the course of this class, but you should realize that when we say gyeong, like here, this is spelled very precisely in Korean like this, and there's one Korean character for each Chinese character. One syllable for syllable. Anyway, so I'm going to back this up just a little bit and then shut up and All right, now I'm unmuted. All right, so now, so we'll do that actually 3 times in the course of each of these classes. We'll meet for 2 hours. It's broken up into 3 sessions. The beginning of the first and second session, we'll recite this. At the end of the third session, we'll recite it again. And so if you get nothing else out of this class, you get the good karma, the great merit of reciting the Heart Sutra 3 times every time we meet. And it's good, it's easy to get overwhelmed or overly involved in learning these characters. It's good to stay grounded in what it is that we're really focused on. So now I'm going to, I have to put it in the slideshow mode again. And there we go. All right. All right. So, here it says here. The first and second sessions will always begin with the reciting the Heart Sutra. And the last session will end with reciting the Heart Sutra, followed by reciting the 4 great vows in Sino-Korean. And what is Sino-Korean? Well, I'm about to talk about that in just a moment. This is the big picture, though. This is what we just recited, written out in characters, Hanja. This is the big picture, again, only slightly bigger. And so all the slides that I use in this class are in PowerPoint form. They will be, after the class is over, I will upload the video for this class to YouTube. And as part of the description for the video will be the PowerPoint slides. And one of the things that I want to demonstrate, let's see, here we go. I'm going to break out of the presentation mode for just a second, just to show you something, to show you why you don't really need to take this class, okay? Yeah, so everybody see my web browser up there now? Okay. You can go through the Heart Sutra as long as you have it in an electronic format where you can copy and paste the characters. You can go through one character at a time, copy it, and just have Google explain it all to you. All right? See what I did? I just copied the first character in the Heart Sutra, put it into a Google search field, and Google is very fluent in Chinese. And you'll get all kinds of information about this character. And you can do that one character at a time through the whole Heart Sutra. And And in particular, one thing that will always show up when you do this kind of a search is an entry in what's called Wiktionary, or in particular, the English Wiktionary, which is a great source. And one of the things that you'll see, you can see this entry on Wiktionary on your screens now, right? Is that correct? Yeah. Okay. All right. One of the things that you'll see is that for every character, there's usually multiple entries in different languages. They're called Chinese characters, but they're used by, in particular, by people in China, in Japan, in Korea, and in Vietnam. They're also used in many other countries as well. And so, yeah, I'm only half joking when I say you don't really need to take this class. All you have to do is go through the Heart Sutra and copy and paste and do Google searches on each character. Let's see. I'm going to go back into the presentation mode now. Here. But with that and 2 or 3 books and a lot of time on your hands, you can learn a lot about the Chinese characters in the Heart Sutra. Hopefully this class will help you. You'll still have to do a lot of work on your own. And it will still be very useful for you to just grab a character and do a Google search on it to see for yourself what kind of information that there is. Okay, now for the next couple of slides, we're going to talk about some background information that's useful to know. Hanja, Hangul, Romaja, and all that. An informal initiation to the mysteries of Sino-Korean. So this is a front page of what I believe is the most widely circulated newspaper in Korea. Okay, and so I'm a Zen student. Have been a Zen student for many years, and my teacher is an American Zen teacher. His teacher was a Korean Zen teacher. I've studied with Japanese groups. I've met many Vietnamese and Chinese Zen Buddhists. Also studied some Tibetan Buddhism and other forms of Buddhism. But my primary tradition that I've been brought up in is Korean Buddhism. And and so this course reflects that. But at the same time, and I will be explaining this as we go on even further into class, the Heart Sutra that we are reciting, even if you're reciting it with the Korean pronunciation, it's the same Heart Sutra that people in everywhere in China, in Japan, and Vietnam, and throughout the world largely are chanting the same thing. There are some, so in the Tibetan tradition, they have a slightly different version of the Heart Sutra, but other than Tibetan Buddhists, everybody is chanting the same Heart Sutra. But when you chant it, you have to have some way of pronouncing it. And the way I know how to pronounce it is using the Korean pronunciation. And so that's what I know how to teach. And so if you look at a Korean newspaper, this is a Chosun Daily. It has 3 different writing systems on the front page. You have here Hanja. This is the name of the newspaper, Chosun Daily, written in Hanja. Most of the paper, though, is written in Hangul, which is the native script of the Korean language, and some of it is written in characters that look familiar to English speakers. This is chosun.com, their website. So this is Hanja, Chinese characters, Hangul, the native script of the Korean language, and Romaja, the the English alphabet or the Latin alphabet is being used to sound things out. So the history of writing systems in Korea is kind of interesting. For up until 1433, going back about 200 BC or so, people in Korea could write, but the only writing system that they had was using Chinese characters, or Hanja. 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 Han means Chinese, and Ja means character. And so since Koreans had to learn Chinese characters in order to write, they also learned the Chinese language. Now, you don't have to learn the Chinese language in order to learn Chinese characters, fortunately. But many well-educated aristocratic Koreans did learn literary Chinese and actually wrote not only in Chinese characters, but in the Chinese language. But even when not writing in the Chinese language, they still only had one writing system. They still had to sound things out using Chinese characters. And we'll talk about this process of sounding things out because it's actually quite important in the Heart Sutra. However, eventually, great King Sejong, so he's credited with inventing this writing system himself. He had a lot of scholars, a lot of people help him, but he is credited with inventing the Hangul writing system himself. And the Hangul writing system is actually quite extraordinary. Um, and in this case, Han doesn't mean Chinese, it means great. And Gul means script. However, for various reasons, there was a lot of resistance to widely adopting the Hangul writing system. One reason for that was that Hangul was much easier to write than using Chinese characters, and if the aristocrats and the government officials and all the rich and powerful people in Korea started writing everything in Hangul, it would be relatively easy for people who weren't aristocrats, who weren't rich, who weren't powerful, to be able to read and write just like they did. They wanted to protect their privileged station. And it's, in fact, King Sejong, when he invented Hangul, he said his goal was to create a writing system that a stupid person could learn in 10 days. Um, and the aristocrats didn't want every stupid person in Korea to be equal to them. So they kept a much more difficult writing system in place as much as they could. By the 20th century, though, Hangul came to pretty much be used extensively. However, as we saw when we looked at the front page of the Chosun Daily newspaper, which is it's like the New York Times or the Washington Post well, politically, it's more like the New York Post, I think, if I've got the politics right. But it's has very wide circulation. But Hanja is still used extensively in written Korean for a variety of reasons. So let's see, some other interesting things on this slide, but we need to move on. Let's see what's coming up now. All right. So now, my voice just broke a little bit when I said now. I'm getting over a cold, so I apologize if I sound a little froggy. These are the first two characters of the Heart Sutra. This is Ma. This is Ha. So the first line of the Heart Sutra is actually the title of the Heart Sutra, which is Maha Banya Bara Milta Shimgyong. And I'll repeat that several times more over the course of this class and the next class. This is showing Ma written using 3 different fonts. And this is showing Ha written using 3 different fonts. There aren't huge differences, but they are not exactly the same. So the shape of a character isn't always exactly the same. There are small, sometimes not so small differences in using different fonts. The pronunciation of the characters is not always the same. Even among Chinese people in different regions of China will pronounce things differently. Also, the pronunciation of the Heart Sutra that we use, that Chinese people would use, is well, the Heart Sutra was written down 1400 years ago. And so over time, all languages change their pronunciation. But I'm not even going to go into that. But if you go into different parts of Asia where they all use the same characters to write out the Heart Sutra, they will have slight differences in their pronunciation. As you can see, though, so Sino-Korean, Sino here means Sino is a prefix that refers anything related to China. So Sino-Korean, and broadly speaking, you can talk of Sino-Korean relations or whatever. But here, when we say Sino-Korean, it's the Sino-Korean pronunciation of the Chinese characters. Mandarin is the primary form of modern Chinese. Sino-Japanese is just the Japanese pronunciation of Chinese characters. Sino-Vietnamese is just the Vietnamese pronunciation of Chinese characters. They're all the same, except for the Mandarin, except for the actual Chinese. Um, if you look at the second character, though, the variation is a little more. The Koreans and the Vietnamese both pronounce this as ha. In Mandarin, it's something like hey. I do not speak Mandarin. Mandarin is very difficult to pronounce, at least in my opinion. And for some reason, in Japan, it's pronounced ka. So there's quite a bit of variation in the pronunciation of this character. And Chinese characters are like words. Often Chinese words actually have two characters, sometimes even more than two characters to make a word. But each character by itself is essentially a word. And as everyone knows, words can have multiple meanings. And so ma in uh, Chinese, the Chinese character ma, the Hanja ma. It's just an interesting thing to point out is that in addition to this being the pronunciation of the character, it is also the name of the character. So the name of in English, the name of the letter B is B, right? But the pronunciation is just B, right? So in when we're talking about Hanja, the name of the Hanja and the pronunciation of the Hanja are the same thing. But so the Hanja Ma can mean to rub or scrape. It can mean to brush lightly against. It can mean to deliberate and discuss. But in the context of the title of the Heart Sutra, Ma is used for its phonetic value, which is the same thing that we're doing in English when we write this out as Ma, M-A. And I'll talk a little bit more about this in a second, but Ma in English has a meaning. It can be used as an informal way of referring to one's mother, Ma. But when we say Maha Banya Baramilta Shimgyong, it doesn't have anything to do with informally referencing one's mother, just as Ha in Maha Banya Baramilta Shimgyong isn't referring to the fact that in English, ha is used to mean the sound of someone laughing. Ha 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 ha. The character ha, the Hanja ha, can mean to shout in rage or to scold or to bellow, but it can also be used for its phonetic value to represent the sound of ha. And so every Chinese character, every Hanja must have some recognizable shape. And these are the shapes. This is the shape of Ma, and this is the shape of Ha. Ma and Ha by their shape. Every Hanja has to have a pronunciation, and the pronunciation is different in different parts of Asia. Every Hanja has to have a meaning, and the meaning is different in different contexts. And so it has to have a shape, but the shape can be slightly different depending upon the font or other factors. It has to have a sound, pronunciation, and that can be different in different parts of Asia. And it has to have a meaning, but the meaning is not always the same in every context. All right. So now it is 3:36, and so we're going to take a 5-minute break. Let's see if I can get out of this, and I'll put a timer up on the screen so that people will know when the break is over. But see you back in 5 minutes, everybody. And welcome back from the break. And oh yeah, that's right. Let's see. I've got to once again find the video. So I've made like 12 or more versions of this video of the Heart Sutra, so I can never find the right one when I need it. I apologize for that. Oh, good. It's still highlighted though. Yeah, good. Excellent. So now I'm going to share my screen again. And okay, so now we are here again. Let's see. Slideshow, current slide. There. All right. So we're finished with this slide. And this is just going over again a little bit more how characters can look differently. I'm just going to skip over this now. You can look at this presentation if you're interested. This is just a different example of that phenomenon of the ways that sometimes characters don't look exactly the same. Even though the way that you know that a character is what it is, it's by its shape, how it looks. But it's not always the same. It's just the same thing in English. Differences in handwriting or fonts or whatever. All right. So now we're looking at the very first line of the Heart Sutra. We're looking at the characters of the very first line of the Heart Sutra. Ma, ha, ban, ya, ba, ra, mil, ta, Shim Gyong. And you'll notice that the first two and the last two characters are written very large. Here, that's because I want to focus on those for now. And just to repeat what we've been talking about, every hanja has to have three things: a recognizable physical shape. This is recognized by the eyes. Generally, it's produced by the hands in writing. Has a recognizable sound. The sound is produced by the mouth and is recognized by the ears. And it has a meaning. And this meaning, it's what the character is telling us. What information is the character giving to us? And as we talked about already, sometimes the information that the character is providing to us is just the sound itself. So sometimes the sound and the meaning are the same. So in terms of how characters sound, and all of these languages here have their own systems for pronouncing Chinese characters. These are non-Chinese languages, and they all have their own system for pronouncing Chinese characters. Okay. So here is something, in addition to chanting the Heart Sutra in using the Korean pronunciation, and I have practiced with many groups where we use the Japanese pronunciation of the Heart Sutra as well. But also, often people chant the Heart Sutra in their own language, whatever that is. For me, my native language is English. And so when I chant the Heart Sutra in English, the version that I use starts off like this: the Maha Prajna Paramita Hridaya Sutra, which is not English. This isn't English. Now, the is English, but the rest of it is Sanskrit. And interestingly, it's very strange to have to say the, because there is no the in Sanskrit. If you know anything about Sanskrit, Sanskrit has no definite or indefinite articles. Nevertheless, in English, it just sounds weird if we don't put the there in front of it. Because what are we chanting? We're chanting the Maha Prajna Paramita Hridaya Sutra. Anyway, so this is Sanskrit, but it's sounded out using the letters of our alphabet, which we can read and pronounce. This is called transliterating. And so Sanskrit can be transliterated into English. And this is not particularly, if for people who are like Sanskrit scholars would see this and say, oh, this isn't correct. You got to put funny marks on all the letters to designate the really correct sounds that are in Sanskrit, because the sounds of the Sanskrit language are quite different from the sounds of the English language. So you can't really represent them just by using plain English letters, but you kind of can. I mean, if your purpose is to recite a Buddhist chant, and your purpose is not to become an expert in Sanskrit, then you want something that works. And this works perfectly well for that purpose. Although, if you're chanting with someone who is a Sanskritist or who is very, 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 into Sanskrit, it might drive them a little crazy. But, whatever. All right. Now, now I say these are the letters of the English alphabet. Of course, they're actually originally can be traced back to the Latin alphabet, which was used by the Romans. And so very often, especially in East Asian cultures, when an East Asian language such as Chinese, Japanese, Korean, or Vietnamese is sounded out in using these letters here, it's called Romanization. But transliteration can be done in many different ways. In fact, you can take, this is Maha, written in the Devanagari script, which is actually only one of many ways that you can write Sanskrit in. But this is generally for people who today who are Sanskritists and who are particular about Sanskrit, this is the way they would prefer to see it written, because this unambiguously tells you how it's pronounced if you know how to read this, which I don't. Chinese people long ago decided on their own system for writing out the sounds of Sanskrit in Chinese characters. And this is how they decided to write out Maha. Ma-ha. Korean people can write out, have a very systematic way of representing the sound, the characters of Chinese Hanja. Korean people have a very systematic way of representing Hanja in their own, in the sounds of their own language. In the Korean, so Korean, English, and Chinese could not be more different from each other. If you know, they're basically almost completely unrelated, except in being human languages. So Korean is very different from Chinese in its pronunciation, its grammar, and everything else. Except in its vocabulary, over half of all the words in Korean come from China because of the influence of Chinese culture. But anyway, this is how Koreans write out Maha from this, originally from this. And then this is how English-speaking Americans or anybody who speaks English or anybody who reads these letters with these sounds transliterates this. So this is all transliteration. And then this is just restating the same thing. And you end up with some funny names. Hansification is one way of referring to the practice, referring to the process of sounding out any language, including Sanskrit. What I forget what year it was at the Winter Olympics. I think it was the Winter Olympics were hosted in China. There was a small army of people came up with ways of writing out the names of every single one of the 10,000 athletes in Chinese characters. Right. And when you do the same process going from Chinese to Hangul, Korean, sometimes called Hangulization, and when you take any language and sound it out using the Latin alphabet, this is called Romanization. Now, when we chant the Maha Prajnaparamita Hridaya Sutra, which is what I chant when I chant the Heart Sutra in English, in Korean, this is pronounced Maha Banya Bara Milta Shim Gyong. And now all of a sudden something very different is going on in the last two characters. Shim and Gyong are words in Chinese. These two characters are not being used for their sound, they're being used for their meaning. Most of the characters in the Heart Sutra are used for their meaning, not just transliteration of a Sanskrit. There's a lot of characters in the Heart Sutra that are being used for transliteration, but most of them are being used for their meaning. So in the last two characters of the Heart Sutra, what we find here is translation, not transliteration. And you know, I don't want to overwhelm people with complications, but so what we have going on here now is this is Hridaya Sutra written in Sanskrit, right? This is Shim Gyong written in Hanja. This is Shim Gyong written in Hangul. And this is Shim Gyong written in Latin, in English, Latin, Romanization, whatever you want to call it. Oh, and one thing, and I'm going to clean this up a little bit. Sometimes this Gyong is written with just an O. It's more properly written with an EO. And in fact, there's a very funny YouTube video, a very good Korean online Korean teacher, and she has a little video on how the differences between the O and the EO sound in Korean, and the ways that English speakers mispronounce these O sounds in Korean, and then part of the video is where she shows how Koreans make fun of the way that how to basically she shows how to mispronounce Korean words in a way that where you can make fun of Westerners trying to pronounce Korean words. It's pretty funny. Anyway, so sometimes the Heart Sutra is transliterating from Sanskrit. Most of the times, the Heart Sutra is translating from Sanskrit. The version of the Heart Sutra that we're looking at, and that everyone, virtually everyone in the world chants, unless you are a practitioner of Tibetan Buddhism, it was written by Xuanzang. And Xuanzang actually was a pretty interesting guy. And he came up with his rules for when to translate and when to transliterate. And this is important. I would encourage you to take a look at it. It's makes some good points, but he's basically giving his justification for why sometimes he would translate things and why sometimes he, most of the time he would translate things, but sometimes he would transliterate things. All right. Now, ma ha, ban ya, ba ra mil ta shim gyong. All right. So we're continuing to focus on these last two characters in the title of the Heart Sutra. And it turns out that both of these words in Korean have many different meanings. And so one of the interesting ways to investigate, now I showed previously how easy it is to just copy and paste characters into a Google search field and see what Google says. Now, one of the interesting things you can do in Google is to say, just show me images that are related to what I'm searching for. And if you do a Google image search on Shim, the Korean way of writing Shim or heart, you'll get pictures of Shim Etum, who is a, what is she? She's a model and a Pilates instructor and some sort of a YouTube star. And if you do searches on Gyeong, you'll get pictures of Gyeong Soo-jin, who is a TV star in Korea. And that's because both Shim and Gyeong are names. They're personal names in Korean. They're both personal names and family names in Korean, in addition to meaning many other things. So actually, most of the time when these words are being used in Korean by themselves on their own, they don't mean heart and sutra. But if you put the two characters together, Shimgyeong, then you do a Google search on that and the Heart Sutra pops up. You say, show me a picture of Shimgyeong to Google, and it will show you pictures of the Heart Sutra. Yeah, so there are, for any given a syllable in Korean, and Shim and Gyeong are two of the syllables of the Korean language, there can be many different hanja that are related to that. There are many different meanings associated with it. Oh, and this is just kind of a humorous example of that. This is true especially in Chinese. So when movies are translated into Chinese, just as they had to come up with Chinese characters for all of the Olympic athletes, all 10,000 Olympic athletes, no matter what their native language was, the Chinese people had to be able to write out their names in Chinese characters, because that's how Chinese, just as when we read about Chinese athletes in an American newspaper or on a website, it's spelled out using our letters. When Chinese write about non-Chinese athletes, they spell it out using their letters. Or when the Chinese translate movies into Chinese, they spell out my ke my si, spelled out with Chinese. This is Michael Myers of Halloween movie fame. This is how to spell his name in Chinese characters. All right, and this last slide, this just emphasizes how Xuanzang applied his rules of when to transliterate and when to translate. Everything in green is instances of the 6 characters Banya Bada Milta, which means Prajnaparamita, right? And that shows up a lot in the Heart Sutra. It shows up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times. So Banya Prajnaparamita, Banya Bada Milta, shows up 6 times in the Heart Sutra. All the characters that are highlighted in blue are other examples of transliteration, including the entire mantra at the end of the Heart Sutra. So out of a total of 270 characters in the Heart Sutra, 77 of those characters are being used for transliteration. So that's a lot, but still most of the characters in the Heart Sutra are being used for translation. All right, so this is just, this is a summary slide. I don't want to spend too much time on the summary slide. The next one is a little bit more important. This goes over these, what I've tried to do is present all these kind of different terms that are important to know or good to know. The terms that are highlighted in yellow are ones that you kind of need to know, need to have some understanding of. And then this is just an example of how to take a mantra. This is the mantra for accomplishing one's aspiration, which is a very popular mantra, as you can imagine. This is basically a mantra for good luck or for success. That's very, very popular in Korea. And is showing how it's written in Hanja, how Korean people write it in Hangul, and how it can be transliterated using Romaja, which is Romanization. When you Romanize Korean language, is called Romaja, which means Roman letters in Korean. All right, this slide is a little bit more important. This breaks down each character into the 3 things that every character must have. It has to have a shape, has to have a sound, has to have a meaning. And what do you really need to know? You need to know what the character looks like, how to write it, and the components that make it up. There's other things that are important to know, like, is this character a component of other characters? So you want to know what the components of a character are, but sometimes it can also be a component of other characters. And we'll talk about radicals a little bit throughout the class. But radicals are very important for knowing how to look a character up in a dictionary. If you're hunting for a character, you got to know about radicals. Things that are helpful to know are where else is this character encountered? Is it used besides the Heart Sutra, is it widely used? Does it have a special meaning in Buddhism? And also, is it used in the Chinese language and Chinese literature generally, not just in the Heart Sutra and not just in Buddhism? For the sound, you need to know the Romaja. Basically, that's the thing that you need to know. When we chant the Heart Sutra, when we chant Maha Banya Bada Milta Shim Gyong, that's what I mean when I say Romaja. And that is necessary to learn for this class. Pinyin, which is the official Mandarin pronunciation for characters, is you don't have to learn Mandarin. You don't have to learn how Pinyin is pronounced. You should begin to kind of know how Pinyin is written out, because just like with radicals, if you can't remember a character, or you need to look a character up, if you think I've given you the wrong information, or you read something somewhere that said a character means one thing but you thought it meant something else, so you need to look it up. You need to find out. The radical that's associated with the character and the pinyin pronunciation of the character are the 2 most common ways of looking up Chinese characters in a dictionary. Okay. What's very helpful, it's very helpful to know the Hangul. It certainly isn't required for this class, but along the way I will be showing you Hangul, and it is quite helpful. So I'm saying it's very helpful to know. It's also helpful to know the Japanese, Vietnamese, and Mandarin pronunciations. That's a lot to learn. But it's helpful to know that they do have different pronunciations for different people in different parts of Asia. And the meaning, what you need to know is now for the main characters in the Heart Sutra, which I said there's 119 unique characters in the Heart Sutra, you should know how to write those characters, how they're pronounced in Romaja, and uh, what they mean. And specifically, you don't have to know all the different meanings of a character. You have to know what it means in the Heart Sutra. Now, for characters that are that don't appear on their own in the Heart Sutra, but they are components of characters in the Heart Sutra, you still have to know how to write them because they're parts of the characters that you're learning how to write. Um, you, you know, the sound and the meaning for those characters is not as important, but they're very helpful. It's hard to just remember things without having any meaning associated with it. And it's helpful to know. So I said you only need to know the meaning of characters as they're used in the Heart Sutra. It can be helpful to know the other meanings of a character as well. All right. This is just another slide with the last two characters in the title of the Heart Sutra. And I think the one thing I want to point out in this slide is just that if you look at this character here, which is the character Shim in Korean, means heart. In Japanese, if you chant the Heart Sutra in Japanese, it has almost exactly the same pronunciation. But most of the time in Japanese, when this character is written and then read out loud, it'll be read out loud as kokoro. And Kokoro is the name of a very famous a novel written in 1914 by Natsume Soseki. He's an interesting guy. So now we're going to get into more about how to actually write the characters, okay? So far I've been providing kind of background information to provide you with some context and background. One of the most important things about writing Chinese characters is that every Chinese character takes up the same amount of space. So here's down here in this little red box is the main point of this slide. Every hanja must fit into the same size square as every other hanja. Therefore, hanja always form nice and neat rows and columns. So here I've written out the first more or less 4 lines of the Heart Sutra in so this is English, but I've taken out all the spaces because just to make an apples to oranges comparison with Chinese, where they don't use spaces so much. This is the Mahaprajnaparamita Hridaya Sutra. Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, when practicing deeply, the Prajnaparamita perceives that all 5 skandhas are empty and is saved from all suffering and distress. And this is Mahabanya Bharamilta Shimgyong, Kwanjaje Bosa Hengshim Banya Bharamilta Shijo Gyon, etc., etc. The thing to notice here is that the Chinese characters automatically line up into columns because they always have the same width. That is kind of a rule for Chinese characters. They always have to have the same width. And they have the same height, so they always make nice rows and nice columns. This part of the slide here, the green part, shows 2 very simple characters and 2 very complicated characters. The characters for distress and myak and destroy, and therefore, and no matter how many strokes or how complex a character is, how many pieces it has, they always take up the same amount of space. Now we're kind of getting closer and closer to actually learning how to write these characters. So this is the very first character in the Heart Sutra, as I've already stated a couple of times, Ma. It has 3 components. This component here, which is Guan, this component here, which is Rim, and this component here, which is Su. So Ma, at least in the Heart Sutra, Ma just means Ma, and it's written like this. Guan means vast. It's a very nice word. It has a nice meaning. So it's supposed to represent a little house on a cliff where you have a very nice view, a view that is very vast. And that's the character Guan. Rim is a character that's made by putting together 2 characters, each of which represents a tree. So Rim means forest. And Su is a character that just means hand. So Ma is made up of Guan and Rim and Su. And so this kind of shows why it's good to look at components. If you just had to write this character from scratch, it's a little overwhelming. Um, it's still a little challenging, even once you know what the components are, but it makes it a little bit easier. And also this slide illustrates the point about how when you take this character, it has to be compressed and moved to fit into its part of the square. This character here has to be compressed and moved up to here to fit into its part of the square. And this character here has to be squished and moved up so that all together they still take up the same space as each one of these did by themselves. And in the next slide, we take that to the next stage, because it turns out that Guan is made up of 2 components, and Rim is made up of 2 components. Su is just at least can be considered as a final place to stop. And so each of these components also takes up a full square, and they have to be compressed together in order to make up the component. And so another thing that's illustrated here is the way the components themselves can be broken down into subcomponents. All right, and now we're getting to the point where we can start looking at the well, let's see, how are we doing on time? We've got, okay, it is 4:15 now. So I'm going to take a 10-minute break. We'll come back to this slide, and in the third session, we will spend our time looking at how to actually write characters. And in particular, how to start writing these characters in the title of the Heart Sutra, and also we'll answer questions. And now there's going to be stuff that I won't get covered, by the end of the time that we have together today. I'm going to make 1 or more supplemental videos to cover all the characters in this month's lesson. Anyway, so I'm going to take a break now, 10 minutes. Okay. So we're back for the last session to go for another 35 minutes approximately. Are there questions or comments, anything at this time? Or shall I just, okay, just gonna jump in. All right. So one thing I want to do now is show you, well, what we really need to do at this point, is really need to start looking at how do you write these things, okay? When you're writing them, you should have some idea of what you're doing. You should know, what's going on. But ultimately, it comes down to taking a pencil or a pen, some sort of writing implement, to a piece of paper, writing them out. So how does one go about doing that? Well, let's see. So as I said, you can, let's find a good example. Oh yeah, this is a wonderful example. Okay. So if you download these slides, you can copy any of the characters that are on the slides. Then you can, now everybody can see my browser here, right? You can see the browser, right? Paste in there, but instead of just pasting the character by itself, you can say, if I can spell, stroke order. Stroke order is how you write characters, how you write Chinese characters. And of course, I don't know how people learned how to write Chinese characters before the invention of the internet. I have no idea. But now that we do have the internet, all you have to do is take a character, put it into a Google search field, and say, show me the stroke order, and then usually click on the very first thing that comes up, and there it is. This is how you write the character. I mean, it'll tell you, usually these pages will tell you other information. Well, somewhere on here is probably the pinyin, pronunciation, the meaning. This is the character for forest. It has, as you can see down here, it says it has 8 strokes, which is kind of nice to know. Each of these tree characters has 4 strokes. Okay. And so that's a good way to learn how to write Chinese characters. Another thing you can do is you can go to, there's actually quite a few places on the internet where you can generate your own what are called worksheets or practice sheets. And I've already titled, so this is a very nice online site called Purple Culture, which has all kinds of tools for learning Chinese and learning Chinese characters. And unfortunately, in order to use this tool with all the bells and whistles that really help you the most, you got to pay them like $3 a month. But once you do that, then you can put any character into this field here, and I'll put a link to this in the description for the video. You say generate a worksheet, and up pops a printable PDF file in color, which says, okay, here's your character. Here's the first stroke, and notice these very helpful lines. In fact, I'm going to make this bigger, right? I'm scrolling down. Let's see. No, I don't want to mess it up too much. Okay, good. All right. So here's the character that you want to write. Here's where you place the first stroke, up here. Above this line, below this, here's where you put the second stroke. So the active stroke is always in red. Here's the third stroke, and here's the fourth stroke. And now you've made one tree of the 2 trees that make up a forest. And then it, oh yeah. Oh yeah. Because I made it bigger, I missed the stuff over here. And here's the second stroke, third stroke. I mean, yeah, first, second, third, and fourth stroke of the second tree. So, and if you see, these 2 trees are not exactly the same. This little branch of the first tree is pretty small, the second tree is a pretty normal. Anyway, now not only can you do that with one character, I'm going to go back to the let's see, here it is. Back to the presentation and go to not the last slide, but the second to last slide, which has all of the characters, all of the hanja to learn for this month. You have a whole month to learn all these characters, and I'm gonna make a couple more videos that won't be live, that will go over a lot of things we haven't had time to talk about in this class. But right now I want to show you, you can take that, just copy these 30 characters, go back to this Chinese practice worksheet generator website, and you can put all of those in there. And what I would do is I would say, maybe I don't need to practice this one right here, which only has one character in it. Now, I'm going to take out some of the really ridiculously simple ones, which you will have a lot of practice writing, because the ridiculously simple characters that are usually just one stroke are components of lots and lots of the characters that we'll be writing. So you'll be writing them over and over and over again anyway. But just I'll leave everything else in, and then you click Generate Worksheet, and you get a new PDF file that has them all. The first page is a practice sheet for the very first character. This is the Guan character that is a component of Ma. The second page of the PDF is for the Rim character, which is another component of Ma. Then the Su character, which is the hand character. Then this is a subcomponent of Guan. This is Han. You remember that, Guan was like a cliff with a little house on it. Han is just a cliff. And how do you write this character? Well, write this stroke here and this stroke here. And then the most of the squares in the worksheet are blank, and those are for you to write in, obviously, right? And so every page is a practice sheet for a separate character, and you generate those all just by entering the characters into this field and clicking Generate Worksheet, and doing a little bit of work. If you come back and look at this video, you can see all of the different options that I've selected here. Yeah, down to there. All right, so if you make all of these selections, some of which are not available if you use the free version. So you can, if you don't want to pay them $3, you can just go through and make as many of these selections as you can, and then take a slightly less helpful version of the results. All right, now I'm going to show another tool for learning how to write the characters, which is a, make this, okay, full screen, good. This is a web application that I wrote that's, there will be a link to in the description for this video. So here's, this is the whole Heart Sutra right here, and you can go through and you can click on any character in it. Let's click on this character over here. Let's see, let's find a really funny looking character. Oh yeah. All right. Excuse me. This is the character for Hinder. It is it's a mess. But down here is down here at the bottom of this page, in the green square, is a interactive. See this button that says "Click here to animate"? I'm going to click it. There's one stroke, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Okay, 19. Only 19 strokes. And you can see up here also there's a field in up above that says components of the character. And so this is one component. This is so the first two components here are kind of the main components, and then the rest of it is breaking down those components. And it also shows you what the Mandarin pronunciation is. This field here where it says location, so this may show up in, as you can see up here along the top, there's other things in addition to the Heart Sutra that I've entered the characters for. And for every character in the Heart Sutra, in the location field, up at the top here, in this blue field up here, where the field says locations, if that is a main character Heart Sutra, it will say H, then it will say what the pronunciation is, and then it will tell you how many times it appears in the Heart Sutra. And I will also give you the meaning. But that was jumping kind of ahead. Let's look at the title of the Heart Sutra. So you can go through the title one character at a time, and for each character, as you click on it, you'll see that you have, again, you have the opinion up here, the fact that it's in the Heart Sutra, which is designated by this H.MA, that's the pronunciation, 2, and then I also give the Romaja Ma, which is a repeat of what's over here, and is also the Hangul, and then what the meaning is. And these are the components down here. And for what I'm focusing on right now, the main thing is that it shows the stroke order animation once again. So this is another place to find stroke order animations, as well as other information as well. And then this column over here shows the characters in the Heart Sutra in more or less the same order that we're going to be following them in the class. In fact, I'm going to make a slight modification to this website so that it shows it in exactly the same order as what we'll be doing in this class. I'll have that in place within the next couple of days. So you can go through this one character at a time. If you hit Heart again up here, it gives you the next 10. Every time you hit the Heart button in this row of buttons, every time you hit the Heart button, it updates it and goes to the next 10. Let's see. Oh yeah. Another thing that's available is on Memrise. I've created a class, or what Memrise calls them, courses, that has, so far it has the first 180 of the characters that we'll be covering in this class. So if you go to, and I'll put the link to this in the description to the video for this class as well. Memrise is a nice website. Basically, it's very dependent upon the people who go in there and create content. So it's a place for people to go and use their tools to create content, and it's free. And so if you go to this page, and again, I'll show you the link. I will provide the link in the description to the recorded YouTube recording of this class, and you pick one of these lessons, and it will list all of the characters that are covered in this lesson. There's 30 in each lesson, and then you can just say learn new words, and now you've got, oh yeah, so here's one of the simpler characters that we're covering this month, a Jew, which is an ancient punctuation mark, and it is an alternative form of this more complicated character, which means Lord. This is the character for Lord. And so what Memrise will do is it will present you with 2 or 3 characters at a time. So here's Han, the Cliff character, which is sometimes also an alternative form of the Guan character. And then it'll start to quiz you, you know. It says, oh, Jew, what is this? What is the character for Jew? And then you go and you click on this one right here, down here. This is the character for Jew. And it says, correct. And then it will say, Han, what is Cliff? What is Han or Cliff? You know, and then you click on this character here, and it will say, oh, correct. Mok, which I haven't talked specifically about Mok yet. Mok, if you know, if you've heard the Korean word Moktak, Moktak is a Korean word that means wooden bell. Tak means bell, and it is a thing that you hit. It's the thing that people hit to make the rhythm while they're chanting. So mok is the Korean word for tree or wood. It's also a component of the very first character in the Heart Sutra. And again, so anyway, so this is showing you this a useful tool that you can use on Memrise. And then there's another course created by someone else on Memrise, which is all about Korean, all about Chinese characters as they're used in Korean with their meanings and pronunciations in Korean. So this is not directly related to the Heart Sutra or to anything Buddhist, but it is helpful in my opinion. All right, let's see. So those are some of the tools that you can use to learn how to write the characters. I would say, oh, there's one other tool that you can use that I need to show you. Let's see if I can find it. It's a little embarrassing how disorganized I am. That's why I'm not sharing my screen while I'm searching around on my computer for this very important file that I, may or may not be able to find. But I've created yes, what have I created? Oh, good. This is probably it. Yes. I've created some a file that has that you can use to make flashcards if you want to print them out, but you don't have to print them out because so the file has on one side of the paper. If you print this out on two-sided paper, you'll end up with flashcards, and then you still have to cut them out yourself. But you still have for every flashcard, you have all the information for each of the characters. So this is a good way of actually learning the characters, learning how to recognize them, the pronunciation, and the composition of the characters. So this is another thing that I'll provide a link to, and you can, if you want to, the Memrise class that I was showing you before is a more online interactive form of basically using flashcards to memorize these characters. If you like to have physical flashcards, then you would use this file here. Let's see. So I can go back to the presentation now, and we'll cover as much as we can in the time that we have left. Are there any questions at this time? Joe? Yeah?
Yeah, just a quick question.
Yeah.
You were showing us, I believe it was an application you had created, and you said you were going to update it with more characters. A question though,
Mhm.
it seemed that at the lower left hand, there was, I guess it was the stroke order
Yeah.
device. That looks very much like calligraphy, like brush, right? To a point. Where the left
Yeah.
column was a little more just straight lines.
Right. Yes, that's correct.
So
And so,
I ask you, like when people are writing with these characters,
Mhm.
like, with a ballpoint pen.
Mhm.
Are they sticking more with the left vertical?
Um,
Or are they doing a little bit more of like the flashiness that comes with the right?
um, I honestly don't know. I mean, so for me, I prefer the less calligraphy looking style. But at the same time, anytime you find a stroke order animation, it's going to be, it won't be really calligraphy style, but it will look more like it's been written by a brush, because that's a traditional way of representing the characters, and that's a traditional way of teaching people how to write them. Um, and and each stroke has, in addition to having a placement and a number, so you write each stroke one stroke at a time. Has to be in the right place. It has to be the right length. It has to be the right angle, but it also has to go in the right direction. And sometimes the showing the brush strokes, you can't necessarily see what direction the stroke goes in uh, unless you have that kind of brush appearance. And even then, sometimes you can't tell. Where am I going now? Okay, all right. Any other questions?
Thank you.
No, you're welcome. All right. So for this class, I showed you this briefly before. I'm going to go to the to this slide here and then go into the presentation mode. So most of the characters that are part of this first month of the class are components. In fact, they're all components except for the very last one. The very last, that's not completely true, but it's almost true. The very last character covered in this class is the very first character in the Heart Sutra. Now, all of these other characters up here are components of characters in the Heart Sutra with a couple, so, so in order to make this character, which is the character for boat, which is a component of the, component of the third character in the Heart Sutra, and I'll show you the component breakdown in just a second. But to make this character, got to have this character. The two little lines in here are actually their own character, but this is not really a standalone character. This is the radical form of the character for right here, for ice. And so the nice thing about this is that this is called Bing, this is called Bing, and this is another radical form. This is also called Bing. They're all ice. Only this one actually appears as a component in the first line of the Heart Sutra. This character doesn't appear anywhere in the Heart Sutra, but since this component is really related to this, I'm assigning this as a character as well. This character is the character Yang for forever, which is assigned because it's the traditional character that is used to, let's see, let me show you what it's used for. Here it is. This character, Yang, forever, is traditionally used to show people how to write strokes with a brush. You can write these strokes with a pen as well, but the way that it's written here kind of shows this here is wide and this is narrow. This is wider and it narrows down here. This little swoop down here is produced in a special way if you know how to use a brush, which I don't. These are the 8 different strokes. Now, let me caution you about this. This is a very traditional way of showing people how to make the strokes that are used in Chinese characters. Personally, I don't think this is the most useful way for beginners to learn how to write characters. I think the most useful way is to focus on the components. Many of the components only have 2 or 3, some only have 1 stroke. But so Chinese has tens of thousands of characters. Those characters are made up of slightly over 200 different component parts. And those components, when you look at a character, you can see, once you learn to recognize the components, you can see them very quickly, even if you don't know the character. But the actual strokes is a bit, in order to say that all of the tens of thousands of characters in written Chinese are made up of these strokes, is a bit of a abstraction. Because in fact, this character is not made up of 8 strokes. This character is made up of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 strokes. So what's being used to illustrate how the different strokes are made is an abstraction away from how this character is even actually written. It's not written with 8 separate strokes. But sometimes it can be useful. And when you're looking a character up, when you're say, well, what is this little part? Because some of the parts of characters are just little dots. And they say, oh yeah, that little dot is Dian. That's Dian, which means dot. And so it's good to know about this diagram, about how this character is used as a reference character for how the strokes are made. But personally, I think it's important to know, but I don't think it's the way that you should. You shouldn't like learn every character by trying to figure out how it corresponds to this kind of a diagram, in my opinion. And we're almost out of time. I'm gonna stop sharing for just a second, just to ask if there's any questions or when you get the so by late tomorrow, I will have uploaded the YouTube video, and it will have the presentation slides, which will include that one slide in particular towards the end, which has all the 30 characters. And then it will also, the description of the video will include links to all the tools that I showed for beginning to learn how to write characters. Now, let me just, who here has written Chinese characters before at all? Even just a little bit? Okay. So for me, like I've been working at it for about 3 years now, but I'm still really learning myself. If you're starting from scratch, or if you're pretty much a beginner, then I would really encourage you to, and this is also addressed to anybody who's watching this as a recorded video. I would really encourage you to focus on the simple components that often only have 2 or 3 strokes in them. Practice those a lot. These components will come up again and again and again in the Heart Sutra. And even though this isn't a class in Chinese, if you're ever interested in learning Chinese or Japanese or Korean or Vietnamese, this will be very helpful to you. Anyway, so with that, we will end this class like we do every class with one more time reciting the Heart Sutra. Actually, let me just illustrate one thing that's useful. I'm gonna, let's see. I'm gonna share my screen again just to make a point. If you know the Heart Sutra, and if you have it written out, and I won't use that one because it's, yeah. If you know the Heart Sutra, and then you have access to a file like this, or you can just Google it anywhere on the internet, you can go through and you say, well, Ma ha ban ya ba ra mil ta shim gyon guan cha je bo sal hing shim ban ya ba ra mil ta shi jo gyon o on ge gong do il che go ek. And if you just have the pronunciation of the sutra committed to memory and you have the characters written out, you can go through it. Each character is one syllable. And you say, oh, this means this is ache. And che go sa ri ja shi je bob kong sang. Oh, sa ri ja. Oh, now I'm screwed up. So even though I have the Heart Sutra memorized, when I'm talking to a group of people and I stop partway through and I try to pick up it again, I get confused. But sa ri ja, this is the name of Shariputra. This is how Shariputra's name is written in the Heart Sutra. Anyway, so that's just an encouragement for what we're about to do, which is to recite the Heart Sutra one more time. Learning to recite the Heart Sutra is a very helpful for learning to write it. Let me see, where do I have that? This time I should be able to find it. Yep, here it is. And just at the end, we'll also recite the 4 great vows, and we'll do it the way that we're learning the Heart Sutra. We'll do it pronouncing the Chinese characters using the Sino-Korean pronunciation, and I'll just recite that and follow along as best as you can. Bao Song Soan, Jung Seng Mu Byon Soan Do, Bone Mujin Soan Dan, Bomun Mudiang Soan Hak, Bulto Musang Soan Som. And thanks everybody for coming. It's been great for me. I hope it was good for you. And like I said, I'll get the things that I promised up on YouTube by sometime late tomorrow, and I will put up more recordings that cover, all these characters, all the components in somewhat gory detail. Going through it and saying, oh, this character, you break it down into these characters, and each of these parts you break it down. It can get a little tedious, but that's how you have to do it. And so I will do that, and I hope people will follow along with those other recordings as well as they can. Bye-bye. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Bye, Kurt. Thanks.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.